Hey everybody, happy new year. It is today's the 31st. So cool. Happy new year. It'll be 2026 here in a little while. Um I actually want to finish up this book. Uh I want to finish it up today. So I am skipping a whole lot of stuff. And there's still a whole lot of stuff left to read in this thing. So if you're interested in biblical history at all, and there's some amazing stuff in here, that's the book, and you should get it if you're interested in all this. So uh, we are actually moving forward to Thomas Aquinas and then on into the Reformation, Martin Luther, people like that. And I'm going to go through some of these people you've heard of, uh, uh, especially if you're Protestant, and some you might not have. But I am moving so much forward that I'm not even going to put a chapter on the video, because normally it's like church history chapters, blah 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 blah. And I think this chapter I'm in right now, and I'm moving through several chapters today, but this is chapter 23 in the book, so I've moved forward considerably from the last video. Um, and I'm gonna go through. I've got uh, several chapters here actually. Um, but I'm going to be going through, I think, like chapter 39, maybe. Uh, yeah, chapter 39. And this is where I'm starting at, is chapter 23. So I'm covering a lot today, but hopefully it won't be too long of a video. Because I'm breaking like a whole bunch of stuff up, and there's a whole lot of stuff that's being missed that you really need to get the book to read about. And we're going to finish this up today. I'm going to go through the Reformation, and have some time, uh, if we have some time, I might read a little bit of modern church history, say from the, I don't know, 16, 1700s up through today. If we have time, mention Billy Graham or somebody like that. But today I'm starting off with Thomas Aquinas. And I'm starting off with Thomas Aquinas because later on, when I mention Martin Luther, there's issue between Aquinas and Luther. So uh, that's where I'm starting. Thomas Aquinas, from 1225 to 1274, known as the Angelic Doctor, was of noble birth, his mother being the sister of Frederick Bar- Barbarossa. I don't know this guy's name. Barbarossa. He was educated at Monte Cassino and at the University of Naples. He became a Dominican monk against the wishes of his parents and devoted himself to study. He was a large, shambling, uh, taciturn. I don't know what that word means. Anyway, he was a large guy, somewhat absent-minded. Uh, when his classmates at Cologne teased him about being a dumb ox, that's what they called him. You're a dumb ox, you know. The teacher, Albert, remarked that one day the lowing of this ox would fill the world, and I believe it has, uh, especially if you're Roman Catholic. The prodigious learning of Thomas was applied to the problem of integrating the new, or for that day, the new for that day, because there's like all this history that I'm not even getting into. Uh, so, integrating the new for that day, natural philosophy of Aristotle when the revealed theology of the Bible as interpreted by the church. In so doing, he took the position of moderate realism and became the leading scholastic thinker to uphold that position. He believed that in the realm of natural philosophy, comparable to modern science, man, by the use of reason and logic, reason and the logic of Aristotle, could gain such truths as those of God's existence, providence, and immortality. Beyond this realm, concerning such ideas as the incarnation, the Trinity, creation and time, sin, and purgatory, man could only get truth through faith in God's revelation in the Bible as interpreted by the fathers and the councils. Reality existed in God's mind before it existed in things or in man's mind. Thomas endeavored to synthesize the two areas of faith and reason into a totality of truth in his great work called Summa Theologia. Because both are from God, there can be no essential contradiction between them, according to Thomas Aquinas. His Summa contra Gentiles was a handbook of arguments from natural revelation to train missionaries to the Muslims. The Summa Theologia consists of 3,000 articles, including over 600 questions in 3 major sections. And there's a whole lot there. We'll skip down a little bit. Aquinas rationalized the idea of indulgences created to free one from the satisfaction normally necessary in the sacrament of penance by his emphasis on the availability of the extra merits of Christ and the saints. These merits can be drawn upon by the church for the penitent. His moderate realism led him to emphasize the church as a corporate institution at the expense of the freedom of the individual. There is also the danger that his postulate of the two realms of knowledge, natural philosophy and biblical revelation, interpreted by the church, may lead to a belief in double truth and the separation of knowledge into two realms. And there's some more written here, not all about him, but it's like about the Franciscans and Dominican orders and stuff like that, which Aquinas came from. And it just goes into like philosophers, William Ockham, Roger Bacon, so if you don't know these names, that's okay. You can get the book and read about them. Now I'm going to move forward to 1329 to 1384 for John Wycliffe. And remember what we said, Aquinas he lived from 1225 to 1274. So we just jumped forward to John Wycliffe, and he lived from 1329 to 1384. Okay, so Wycliffe studied and taught at Oxford for the greater part of his life. Until 1378, he wanted to reform the Roman Church by the elimination of immoral clergymen and by stripping it of poverty, which he felt was a root of corruption. And I think we got some more on him. No, yeah, I'll keep reading. Let's see here. In a work entitled Of Civil Dominion in 1376, he asserted a moral basis for the ecclesiastical leadership. God gave the use and possession of property, but not the ownership, to church leaders as a trust to be used for his glory. Failure on the part of ecclesiastics, the higher up people, the ecclesia. Uh, but failure on the part of ecclesiastics to fulfill their proper functions was a sufficient reason for the civil authority to take the property from them and to give it to someone who would serve God acceptably. This view suited the nobles who were happy to seize the property of the Roman Church. They and John of Gaunt championed Wycliffe so that the Church of Rome did not dare to touch him. Wycliffe, disgusted with the captivity and schism, was not satisfied with this more negative approach, and after 1379 began to oppose the dogma of the Roman Church with revolutionary ideas. He attacked the authority of the Pope in 1379 by insisting in writing that Christ and not the Pope was the head of the Church. He asserted that the Bible instead of the Church was the sole authority for the believer, and that the Church should model itself after the pattern of the New Testament. To support those beliefs, Wycliffe made the Bible available to the people in their own tongue. By 1382, the first complete manuscript translation into English of the New Testament was finished. Nicholas of Hereford completed translation of most of the Old Testament into English by 1384. Let's see, let's go down through here. Let's see. Nicholas of Hereford or Hereford completed the translation of most of the Old Testament into English by 1384. Thus, for the time, Englishmen were able to read the whole Bible in their own language. Wycliffe went still further by 1382 in opposing the dogma of transubstantiation. Wycliffe argued that the substance of the elements was indestructible and that Christ was spiritually present in the sacrament, and was apprehended by faith. If adopted, Wycliffe's new view could mean that the priest could no longer withhold salvation from one by withholding the body and blood of Christ in the communion. Wycliffe's views were condemned in London in 1382, and he was forced to retire to his rectory at Lutterworth. He had made provision for the continued dissemination of his ideas, however, by founding a group of lay preachers, the Lollards, who preached his ideas over all England until the Roman Church by forcing the statute of De Horatio Comberendo through Parliament in 1401 made the death penalty the punishment for preaching Lollard ideas. Wycliffe's accomplishments were influential in paving the way for subsequent Reformation in England. He gave the English their first Bible in their vernacular and created the Lollard Group to proclaim evangelical ideas over all England among the common people. His teachings of equality in the church were applied to economic life by the peasants and contributed to the Peasants' Revolt in 1381. Bohemian students studying in England carried his ideas to Bohemia, where they became the foundation for the teaching of John Huss. There were still Lollards in England during the early Anglican Reformation. So we mentioned John Huss. Who's this dude? Well, he lived from 1373 to 1415. When Richard II of England married Anne of Bohemia, students from that land came to England to study. When they returned to Bohemia, they carried Wycliffe's ideas back with them. John Huss, pastor of Bethlehem Chapel from 1402 to 1414, who had studied in the University of Prague, later taught in it and had become its rector in about 1409, read and adopted the ideas of Wycliffe. His preaching of these ideas coincided with the rise of Bohemian national feeling against the control of Bohemia by the Holy Roman Empire. Huss proposed to reform the church in Bohemia along the lines similar to those proclaimed by Wycliffe. His views exposed him to papal enmity, and he was ordered to go to the Council of Constance under a safe conduct from the emperor, but the safe conduct was not honored. Both his and Wycliffe's views were condemned there. After Huss refused to recant, he was burned at the stake by order of the council, but his book, De Ecclesia, in 1413, lived on. And there's some more stuff about all that. I'm not going to read it. There's this guy, Savonarola. Savonarola. Okay. 1452 to 1498. Wycliffe and Huss were branded as heretics who made the Bible the first standard of authority, but Savonarola was more interested in reform within the church at Florence. Becoming a Dominican monk in 1474, he was assigned to Florence in 1490. He tried to reform both state and church in the city, but his preaching against the evil life of the Pope resulted in his death by hanging. He never took the more advanced position that Wycliffe and Huss held, but he did demand reform in the church. All these men anticipated the spirit and work of the reformers to such an extent that Wycliffe, as the outstanding exponent of Reformation measures, has often been called the morning star of the Reformation. So there's all these councils and stuff that goes on. There's reforming councils from 1409 to 1449, and you got the Council of Pisa, 1409, Council of Constance from 1414 to 1418, councils of Basel and Ferrara in Florence from 1431 to 1449. And so then we get into the Renaissance. The Renaissance, which took place in the important countries in Europe between 1350 and 1650, so we're looking at 300 years, marks the transition from the medieval to the modern world. The name, which is derived from the Latin words for birth and back, express the idea of a rebirth of culture. And there's a lot written there about Renaissance. Centralized government provided security and order. The advent of printing with movable type about 1456 in Germany through Johann Gutenberg made it possible to spread information quickly during the latter part of the Renaissance. Nominalism, with its interest in the individual and the empirical approach, as a way to truth, had stimulated tendencies that were to flower in the Renaissance. And we got a lot more stuff there about the Italian Renaissance, biblical humanist. Humanist back then did not mean what it means now. Rise of nation states and middle class, rise of the English nation state, rise of the French nation state, Spanish nation state, the Greek Orthodox Church, 1305 to 1507. Now, the Greek Orthodox Church was around back then. This is just a little bit about what happened between 1305 and 1507, which I'm not going to get into, but there were changes that were made there. Now we're getting into modern history from 1517 and on. Let's see, and we get into the Reformation here. And I read all that about Aquinas and Wycliffe and stuff because right here is where this is going to start to be important for Protestants. And while I've been picking on Catholics, Protestants don't have it all together. We still have, issues and stuff. And in a lot of ways, the Catholics had uh, order and stuff like that we don't have in Protestantism that you know could help uh, in certain things, but in other ways it would be a huge hindrance. And then we see when you read through history, you see what all that turned into, and you hear about preachers, going off the rails and stuff like that, and that's why we don't need that kind of oversight because it just doesn't last really. Like you have to come through and clean house every once in a while, uh, and there has to be a reformation of the church. And so anyway, that's we're going to read about some of this. Okay, the causes of Reformation were not simple and single, but were complex and multiple. The Reformation was both derivative and determinative in its causation. Many causes had their roots in the centuries preceding the Reformation, when Rome had opposed any internal reform and had ignored the rising tide of external opposition that was to cause her so much trouble. The creative personalities of such leaders in the Reformation as Luther and Calvin and others were determinative of the direction the Reformation took. The leaders of the Protestant Reformation usually came from middle class, but those of the Catholic Reformation were aristocratic. For these reasons, the interpretation of the Reformation uh, in this work, the work that I'm reading, is a synthesis. That is, religion is given primary consideration, but secondary political, economic, moral, and intellectual factors are not ignored. And I'm not going to go through all that stuff, but we are going to talk about it. Uh, I'm not going to go through the whole list here. So this is causes of the Reformation. The political factor may be considered one of the important indirect causes for the coming of the Reformation. The new centralized nation states of Northwest Europe were opposed to the concept of a universal church that claimed jurisdiction over the nation state and its powerful ruler. The ideal of such a universal church clashed with the rising national consciousness of the middle class in these new states, the new nation states that were made up. 2. The recent attention given to economics as a motivating factor in human affairs cannot be dismissed casually by the Christian historian, even though he does not accept the materialistic interpretation of Marx, that's Karl Marx, or the economic determinist. The land possessed by the Roman Church in Western Europe was regarded with greedy eyes by the national rulers, nobles, and middle class of the new nation states. The rulers resented the loss of money that went to the papal treasury in Rome. The clergy were exempt from taxes of the national states. And this happened in Germany, Rome, states such as Saxony, Spain, the New World, that's the Americas, North and South America. The abuse of the indulgence system as a tool to get wealth from Germany for the papacy. Okay, so all these things were being abused, and it was the abuse of the indulgence system as a tool to get wealth from Germany for the papacy that angered Martin Luther. Number 3, intellectual factor in the Reformation was that men with awakened minds and a secular outlook became critical of the religious life of their day as represented in the Roman Catholic Church. As the middle class grew in numbers, it became individualistic in outlook and began to revolt against the corporate concept of medieval society that put the individual under authority. Number 4, the moral factor of the Reformation was closely allied to the intellectual and humanistic scholars who had the New Testament in Greek, clearly saw the discrepancies between the church about which they read in the New Testament and the Roman Catholic Church of their day. Corruption had spread through both head and members of the hierarchy of the Roman Church. Self-seeking clerics bought and sold offices freely. Too many enjoyed cinctures, positions in positions in which they received the salary but did none of the work usually associated with the office. Some held offices at once, so strenuously opposed by Luther. And this is talking about a guy named Albert of Mainz, whose agent Tetzel was so strenuously opposed by Luther in Saxony. Justice was bought and sold in the church courts. One could, for a payment of money, get a dispensation that would permit him to marry a close relative, even though the canon law forbid it. Many priests lived in open sin or kept concubines. The people of the diocese were neglected by the bishops, who often failed to engage in the episcopal visitation necessary to supervise the clergy under them and to see that the clergy did not neglect their flocks. Many parish clergy consequently neglected preaching and visitation, being content to say the Mass, which they proclaimed as a magic rite that would bring grace to a person. 5. Changes taking place in the social structure accelerated the disillusionment of medieval people with the Roman Church. The rise of towns and prosperous The rise of towns and a prosperous middle class within the towns created a new spirit of individualism. The new money economy freed people from the dependence on soil as the main way they could make a living, because most people back then were farmers, right? And you had to farm this land for whoever, owned it or whatever, serfs and stuff like that. And they were getting away from that. Number 6, behind the failure of the Roman Church to meet the real needs of the people was the theological or philosophical factor of the Reformation. Some have so overemphasized this element that they can see the Reformation only in terms of a struggle between the theology of Thomas Aquinas and that of Augustine. And that's why I talked about Thomas Aquinas a while ago and Augustine many videos back. It is true that the medieval church adopted the philosophy of Thomas Aquinas. It emphasized the teaching that man's will was not totally corrupted. By faith and the use of the means of grace in the sacraments dispensed by the hierarchy, man could achieve salvation. Augustine believed that man's will was so totally depraved that he could do nothing toward his salvation. God would extend grace to man to energize his will so that he could by faith take the salvation that Christ proffered him. However, any careful study of the writings of the Reformers will indicate that the Reformers went to Augustine from the Bible to seek the aid of his powerful authority, but when they did not arrive at the doctrine but they did not arrive at the doctrine of justification by faith by studying the writings of Augustine. It was the scriptures that brought home that profound truth to them. Number 7. If discontent becomes extreme when people face adverse conditions, their dissatisfaction will usually express itself through some great leader who expressed their ideas for them. The refusal of the medieval Roman Catholic Church to accept reform, indeed, the impossibility that it would reform itself, opened the way for the coming of a leader who would embody the desire for reform of abuses and who would be used to bring about revolutionary changes. Such was the function of Martin Luther, in whom the spirit of the Reformation, with its insistence on the right of the individual to go directly to God through Christ revealed in the Scriptures, was embodied. And we're going to skip a whole lot of other stuff. Oh, sorry, I'm whistling. Y'all might. All right. So now I'm going to get over here and we'll say a little bit about John Calvin. And Calvin and Luther and their differences. Even though Calvin came after Luther. The millions today in Switzerland, Holland, Scotland, the United States, and elsewhere who accept the Reformed faith as their doctrinal basis testify to the importance of the system of theology that John Calvin, from 1509 to 1564, developed. The term Calvinism and the phrase Reformed faith have reference to the system of theology developed on the basis of Calvin's system. Presbyterianism is the word used to indicate the system of church government that Calvin developed. Geneva was the center where Calvin fully worked out his ideas. Calvin may be ranked as the leader of the second generation of reformers. And this is the section on Calvin and Luther, like their differences. Calvin was an interesting contrast to Luther. Luther had been born of peasant stock, but Calvin's father was a notary. This made Calvin a member of the professional class. Luther studied philosophy and theology during his university career, but Calvin had humanistic and legal training. And remember, I said humanistic back then did not mean what it means today. Because of this, he was more the organizer of Protestantism, whereas Luther was its prophetic voice. I think I'll read a little bit on Calvin's theology rather than his life. So we'll go through this a little bit because this gives the whole tulip thing. So at the risk of oversimplification, one can summarize the essence of Calvin's theology by the use of a simple mnemonic device that has been developed in recent years and has often been used by students. The first letters of the main words of Calvin's theology spell the word tulip. The coordinating idea of this theology is the complete sovereignty of God. Calvin had the majestic conception of God and his glory and majestic conception of God and his glory that is so characteristic of some of the Old Testament prophets. He believed in the total depravity of all men. Man has through Adam inherited the guilt of Adam's sin and can do nothing for his own salvation because his will is totally corrupted. Calvin next taught that salvation is a matter of unconditional election apart from human merit or divine foreknowledge. Election is based on the sovereign will of God and is a dual predestination of some to salvation and others to condemnation. Calvin also believed that the work of Christ on the cross is limited to those elected to salvation. This belief is his doctrine of limited atonement. The doctrine of irresistible grace is an inevitable corollary to this. The elect will be saved apart from their own initial desire, as the Holy Spirit irresistibly draws them to Christ. The perseverance or preservation of the saints is the final point of importance in this system. The elect who are irresistibly saved by the work of the Holy Spirit will never be finally lost. Although Calvin's theology has an emphasis similar to that of Augustine, Calvin owes his system to his study of the Scriptures rather than to Augustine. Like other reformers, he went from the Bible to Augustine to seek the support of that prince of the fathers rather than going from Augustine to the Bible and the doctrines of the Reformation. And there's one other person, I got to find him. I didn't go quite this far back, but there's another person that I want to mention. And I've got to find him because he is the opposite of Calvin. So y'all just give me a minute here. Yeah, this goes on through all kinds of people. We go through all kinds of wars, all kinds of stuff. So I am looking for this one other person that I forgot to mention. Hey, there's Jonathan Edwards. How about that? George Whitefield, Jonathan Edwards. Y'all want to know about them? I might read a little bit about them. George Whitefield and Jonathan Edwards. That's the Great Awakening. I was actually looking for. Okay. Let's see. Great Awakening was a series of simultaneous, spontaneous, unorganized. This is the Great Awakening for the United States, British Isles, Switzerland, Germany, Holland, Scandinavia. Okay. So the Great Awakening was a series of simultaneous, spontaneous, unorganized, rural or village congregational awakenings led by godly pastors such as Jonathan Edwards. Revivals might be local, as in Edwards Church, citywide, as in Charles G. Finney's meetings in Rochester. At a college such as the Revival at Yale in 1802, or the one at Cambridge in 1801, and it just goes on through here. So they got a little map here drawing this out. So the Protestant Transatlantic Revival. So you got Anglican, Lutheran, Puritan, decline, European wars, then Great Awakening 1726 to 56. Then it goes to European Revolutionary Wars, Deism, Frontier Life, Second Awakening 1776 to 1812. College camp meeting revivals, which we're actually doing now in the United States. You got the War of 1812 to 1814. Transcendentalism and Unitarianism, the evangelistic revivalism from 1803 to 1846, Finney Baker and Nettleton. The slavery slavery, controversy, industry, global ecumenical lay prayer revival from 1857 to 1895 by Moody, Jones, and Confederate Army revival. Then there's liberalism, sneaks in with evolution, and you have a global revival from 1900 to 1939, which brought forth the Pentecostal, revivalistic evangelists, Tory and Sunday. Tory and Sunday are two people. Then you have the World Wars, neo-orthodoxy, and radical theologies, which brought forth evangelical awakenings beginning in 1945 to present, which is the evangelistic revivalism, and that was Fuller, Graham, Palau, and then the charismatic revivals, declension, spiritual coldness, and crisis is what's down here. So that was like problems that come after that. Let's see here. Trying to give y'all something on Edwards because he's mentioned here. Just trying to find where exactly they talk about him. There's George Whitefield. George Whitefield from 1714 to 1770 made his appearance at this time in Boston, and his preaching there and throughout New England was attended with great success. When Edwards lost his pulpit in 1750, he served as an Indian missionary until 1758. In that year, he became president of Princeton College, where he died of smallpox inoculation in that same year. He upheld a Calvinistic theology and believed that while people have a rational ability to turn to God, because of total depravity, they lack the moral ability or inclination. This ability must be imparted by divine grace. He made much of the sovereignty and love of God in his work, Freedom of the Will. He wrote that God's love draws people to himself and to his service after they have become Christian. Let's see here. Whitefield united the efforts of all these revivalist preachers as he traveled in all the colonies in 7 visits between 1738 and 1769. Although unusual phenomena often followed the preaching, it was a more sober type of revival than the Second Awakening, which was to come near the end of the century. It was the American counterpart of Pietism in Europe and the Methodist revival in England. Such a movement was bound to have unusual results. Between 30 and 40,000 people and 150 new churches were added to those in New England alone out of a population of 300,000. Thousands more came into churches in the southern and middle colonies. A higher moral tone was noticed in the homes, work, and amusements of the people. Colleges such as Princeton, Columbia, Hampden, Sydney, and others were started to provide ministers for the many new congregations. Missionary work was spurred so that men like David Brainerd in 1743, with great personal sacrifice, engaged in missionary work among the Indians after his expulsion from Yale in 1742 for criticizing the spiritual state of a tutor. Presbyterians founded the College of New Jersey, now Princeton University, to train ministers in 1743. Jonathan Edwards' publication of Brainerd's diary inspired many able men to become missionaries. Whitefield founded an orphanage at Bethsaida near Savannah, Georgia, for which he took up collections in his meetings. He also helped the 13 colonies to sense their unity and common culture and values. So we'll move along. Told you I am moving, guys. There's a whole lot of stuff that I have not gone over and that I am actually skipping. Because I'm trying to find, there he is, John Wesley. Okay. John Wesley is the guy that we think of as like opposite of John Calvin. So I wanted to mention Wesley. Let's see. Methodist revival was the third religious awakening in England, coming after the 16th century Reformation and the 17th century Puritanism. It was associated with the name of John Wesley from 1703 to 1791, who dominated the century as far as religion was concerned. Historians readily acknowledge that Methodism ranks with the French Revolution and the Industrial Revolution as one of the great historical phenomena of the century, and some subscribe to the idea that Wesley's preaching saved England from a revolution similar to that of France. Methodism was to Anglicanism what Pietism is to Lutheranism. Wesley was the 15th of 19 children born to Samuel and Susanna Wesley. Susanna taught all her children at home and later urged John to accept lay preachers. He was narrowly saved from death when the Wesley home burned in 1709. Because of this experience, he often referred to himself as a brand plucked from the burning. He entered Oxford in 1720 on a scholarship. From 1726 to 1751, he was a fellow of Lincoln College and was ordained a priest in 1728. After 2 years, during which he helped his father handle a second parish adjoining Epworth, he returned to his duties as a fellow. Wesley then became the leading spirit in the Holy Club, which included his brother Charles. The members of this club were nicknamed Methodist by the students because of their methodical Bible study and prayer habits and regular attempts at social service in jails and homes of the poor. Between 1735 and 1737, Wesley was in Georgia as a chaplain in Oglethorpe's colony. His ritualistic ideas, strict churchmanship, simplicity, and frankness in his relations with women created such difficulties with his parishioners that he was forced to go home in 1737. On May 24, 1738, while listening to the reading of Luther's preface to his commentary on Romans, Wesley's heart was strangely warmed, and he trusted Christ alone for salvation from sin. His brother Charles had had a similar experience 2 days earlier. Because of the brave conduct of the Moravians in a storm at sea on the way to Georgia, the words of Spangenberg in Georgia. The words of Spangenberg in Georgia and the efforts of Peter Böhler, all of which had been important influences in his conversion. Wesley paid a visit to Herrnhut to study the Moravian church more closely. In 1739, George Whitefield, of whom Wesley broke in 1740 because of the former Calvinistic theology, asked Wesley to engage in field preaching at Bristol. Thus began John Wesley's career of field preaching, during which he traveled over 200,000 miles on horseback in England, Scotland, and Ireland, preached about 42,000 sermons, wrote about 200 books, and organized his followers. He organized the Methodist Society and built a chapel in Bristol in 1739. In that same year, he also bought the Foundry building in London and used it as the headquarters for his work. Whitefield, who had become a Christian in 1735, began open-air preaching in 1739, organized converts into societies used by lay preachers, and had a social emphasis with his orphanage in Savannah, Georgia. John Wesley borrowed from him the ideas of open-air meetings, itinerancy, and class meetings. The fine hymns that Charles Wesley, from 1707 to 1788, Charles Wesley wrote hymns. The fine hymns that Charles Wesley wrote were a great help in the meetings. Charles wrote over 7,000 hymns, among which Jesus, Lover of My Soul, Love Divine, and Hark the Herald Angels Sing. Hark the herald angels sing, glory to the newborn King. Yeah, was not originally a Christmas song. You know what I mean? Are still universal favorites, following the path blazed by Isaac Watts from 1674 to 1748, the Congregationalist theologian and father of English hymns. Charles wrote hymns other than rhymed passages of Scripture, which had been used up to that time. Wesley did not want to break with the Anglican Church, and therefore he organized his converts into societies similar to Spencer's collegia. I guess it like college. Spencer's Collegia Patatus. I don't speak Latin or whatever that is. The societies were subdivided in 1742 into classes of 10 to 12 under a lay leader who had the spiritual oversight of the class. In 1744, the first annual conference of his preachers was held in London, and in 1746 he divided England into 7 circuits. In 1784, he ordained 2 men as ministers that set apart Thomas Coke, born 1747 to 1818, as superintendent of the Methodist Church in America. In that same year, the deed of declaration legalized the conference to hold property such as their Methodist chapels. The church in America set up its own national organization that year. Not until after Wesley's death in 1791 were the Methodists of England organized into a Methodist church in 1795, separate from the Anglican Church. The Anglican influence of the Methodist Church was demonstrated by Episcopal polity and the reception of the communion while kneeling at the altar rail. And there's more. It goes on and on. So we got let's see here. Orthodox Church in Russia. Uh, I'm trying to get through all this right now. William Wilberforce, he is responsible for slavery ending in England. He's mentioned in here. The Earl of Shaftesbury, Lord Shaftesbury. Okay, he's mentioned in here. I don't know if you might know him. Uh, John Darby, Edward Irving, George Williams, Charles Spurgeon, the Pastor Charles Spurgeon. Uh, he's in here. Um, let's see, George Hagel's mentioned, Albright, Rich School. Yeah, they got a little thing in here on Charles Darwin uh, and his Origin of Species. Um, Second Great Awakening in America, and that gets us into like Billy Sunday, Dwight Moody, people like that. I wanted to go. I may have missed it. Um, yeah, I think I might have turned past it. Because right now I'm at like I didn't mark everything that I wanted to get into, and we're almost at an hour anyway. Uh, but I wanted to at least take us up to modern times, which we're close to there. This is Martin Luther King Jr. Uh, and that takes us into, let's see, Karl Barth is mentioned. Uh, the guy that come up with the whole God is dead view, he's in here mentioned. And if you read that, he didn't mean that God was dead, like, because you can't kill God. He meant like God is dead because we killed him, like in our minds and stuff. Like God didn't die because God can't die. But what he's saying is we got so into ourselves that we weren't worried about God anymore. Um, and that's not a good thing. Uh, so let's see, decline of liberalism, fundamentalism. Uh, there's Billy Graham. Neo-evangelicals, the Jesus people. So we're looking at 1960s. Pentecostal and charismatic third wave groups. We're looking at early 1900s. So let's see, estimates of the total number involved in three waves in the world range from Patrick Johnstone's 168 million in 1988 to C.P. Wagner's 268 million in 1985 to David Barrett's 332 million in 1988. Where's it talking about the beginning of that? Classic Pentecostal denominations have involved the urban and rural poor lower middle class since 1901, while the charismatic movement has been active in Roman Catholic and mainline Protestant suburban churches since the 60s. These two groups, together with the third wave, have given prominence to the work of the Holy Spirit, while the baptism of the Holy Spirit with tongues is evidence is emphasized in the traditional Pentecostal groups. It just goes into, like, I'm telling you, bro, this is like ton of stuff. You got holiness churches, and then it goes into evangelical parachurch organizations, evangelicals for social action, evangelical feminist movements, return to evangelicalism in mainline churches, changed attitudes among Roman Catholics. You got Vatican II there. And it just keeps going for a while. So anyway, I hope all that's been kind of enlightening. I hope you learned some stuff. We will definitely be bringing a lot of this back up. I will be, because it's important to our studies of the Bible. And if people like start leaving comments or something like, hey man, I don't understand this, how'd we get here, how'd we get there, like, I just took you from way back when all the way to modern day pretty much. And so it's gonna be 2026 here in a few hours. And I just wanted to end this study of church history, and Lord knows I did not get through all of it, not even close. So there's still a lot more. Get the book, and just read it little by little. It's a lot to take in, and really enjoy New Year's, and Happy New Year's to everybody. And I'm done with church history for right now. It might get brought back up, just when I do a lesson or something. I might have to bring up some church history, but I just wanted to let you guys know that there's so much history that is not even covered in our churches anymore, and so many denominations and where they come from, and like all these things have been traced and tracked back and everything else. And we know how it came to be. We know where it came from. We know the history of it. So dig in and learn some stuff. And I guess we'll see y'all again in 2026. And we'll get into the Bible, how we got the Bible, why you can trust it, and we'll get into some Bible texts. Probably start with John or Matthew, but either way, I'm over an hour now, so I'm gonna let y'all go, and y'all enjoy your day, and Happy New Year to everybody. So, all right, see ya. God bless.